Good evening once again. I'm Chris Jansing in for Brian Williams. Day 188 of the Biden administration. We are now just hours away from the first hearing for the bipartisan House Select Committee to investigate the deadly January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. The hearing will play out in this room on the Hill. Tonight, Committee Chairman Benny Thompson, Democrat of Mississippi, writes in an opinion piece for the Washington Post, quote, "When it comes to the security of the Capitol and our democracy, nothing will be off limits. We will do what is necessary to understand what happened, why, and how. And we will make recommendations to help ensure it never happens again." The first witnesses will be police officers who suffered vicious assaults as they sought to protect the complex and lawmakers on that day. Speaker Pelosi has appointed Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois to join Republican Liz Cheney and 7 Democrats to investigate the attack by Trump supporters who wanted to stop the democratic process of certifying President Joe Biden's win. Both Cheney and Kinzinger voted in favor of impeaching Trump following the riot and were the only Republican members to support the committee's formation last month. Today, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy mocked the 2 members of his caucus for agreeing to be part of the panel.
Some Republicans have been saying that the GOP should play ball on this committee. You could get the 3.
Who was that? Adam and Liz?
Well,
aren't they kind of like Pelosi Republicans?
Well, here's how Adam Kinzinger responded to that.
It's childish. We're doing big things right now. We're getting to the answers of the worst attack on the Capitol since the War of 1812. You can call me whatever names you want. And I just believe that, look, bottom line, I'm an elected member of Congress. I'm a Republican.
All this comes in the wake of House Speaker Pelosi rejecting 2 of McCarthy's original picks for the committee, Republican Congressman Jim Banks of Indiana and Jim Jordan of Ohio. McCarthy then removed all of his picks from the committee. Tonight, he tried to introduce a resolution demanding Pelosi seat all 5 of his original choices. Of course, it went nowhere in the Democratic-controlled House. Peter Baker, as this first hearing of the January 6th committee gets underway tomorrow, what are you going to be watching for, listening for?
Well, I think the dynamics of seeing a committee with, of course, 7 Democrats and 2 Republicans not chosen by the Republican leadership will be the dominant, thing everybody's watching. They'll be watching the body language. They'll be watching how they conduct themselves. They'll be watching how do the Republicans, work in concert with the Democrats or not, as the case may be. And obviously, by bringing in the police officers to testify at the beginning, they're establishing the seriousness of the issue, right? Trying to puncture the mythology that some Republicans are trying to create, that this was really just a protest that got a little out of hand, that this really not that different than a normal tourist occasion at the White House, at the Capitol, and so forth. But I think all eyes are going to be on Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger to see how they fit into this committee and what that means for the future of a consensus view of what happened rather than a partisan show for the cameras.
What is it, Yamiche, that the White House is looking for to come out of this?
Well, it's interesting because the White House is essentially saying that President Biden has the same goal as Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and that is to get to the bottom of what happened on January 6th, to understand who was involved, to understand what was probably happening before January 6th, who may have given some of these insurrectionists, these people who broke into the U.S. Capitol, some sort of map and plan. And also, of course, what was the president doing, former President Trump, and what liabilities are there? So there's a lot of things that the White House is watching for. But White House officials also say that President Biden, while of course he's going to be looking at news clips and he's going to be looking to see what these police officers say tomorrow, they also say that he's really focused on COVID and on getting the infrastructure deal done. So in some ways, they're trying to say that, yes, the president is very interested in, of course, seeing justice done and more details about January 6th, but they're also pretty clear that they don't want this to dominate his agenda. So I think that that's a really interesting point from the White House, that they're not trying to really lean in too hard on what's happening on the Hill. But of course, it's going to be riveting testimony because there's going to be these officers talking in detail about how violent that day was, as Republicans have tried to paint it as a loving crowd at a tourist visit.
Yeah, and here's what we heard earlier today. In fact, it was this evening from January 6th committee member Adam Schiff.
Our role is going to be to fully uncover the facts. What is it that people did at that rally to instigate violence? How many of them went to that rally fully planning to do violence? We're at a different place in our country's history right now than we were on 9/11. It's a much more polarized country. Our information is more balkanized. So in that respect, the job of our committee is going to be more difficult than it has in the past.
But Chuck, the original kind of model for this 9/11 was the 9/11 Commission, right? We do, of course, now have a very different kind of panel. Are you concerned about whether this committee will be able to really come up with the kind of report, both in terms of getting to the bottom of what happened, but very importantly, taking a look at how we can make sure this never happens again?
Well, you're right, Chris. The 9/11 Commission was a model. It was created by an act of Congress signed by the president in November of 2002. And the really interesting thing about it was that it would consist of 10 people, 5 chosen by Republican leaders, 5 chosen by Democratic leaders. And if you read the preface to the 9/11 Commission report, what they say is rather remarkable, that they came together, though they had different points of view and different opinions, and wrote a single report, no minority report, no dissent. 10 people unanimously agreed to a complex set of facts and a complex set of recommendations. They came together at a time, and this is a quote from the preface of the 9/11 Commission report, at a time of great partisan divide. And so what I would like to see, and believe it or not, I'm going to finally answer your question from the January 6th committee, is the same thing, that we put aside politics, because what happened on January 6th was too big and too important for us to take a partisan approach. I wish we could do what the 9/11 Commission did. I wish we had 10 people who could come together, Republicans and Democrats, and write a single report. I doubt that will happen.
Well, I guess key to that, obviously, Yamiche, is who's going to testify, obviously, beyond those, what we know will be the riveting testimony of those 4 officers. And we heard Benny Thompson from him in writing that op-ed tonight saying, look, nothing is off limits. And I guess that begs the question, what exactly does that mean, Yamiche?
Well, it's a good question, because I was on the White House lawn today in the Rose Garden talking specifically to House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer about that exact topic. Now, of course, he isn't on the committee, but he essentially said Democrats want to talk to people who were in the room with President Trump. That would, of course, would include people like Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. That would include his children. That would include other White House officials. Of course, lawmakers like Jim Jordan, Kevin McCarthy, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who my reporting and others reporting shows was on the phone with President Trump as former President Trump was watching TV and liking in some part what he was seeing. Kevin McCarthy was yelling at him to do more. All of those players are people that Democrats might want to call. But I will say I've been talking to some Democrats about this and then getting some interesting reporting, which is that they're also worried about executive privilege. And that meaning that when there are people that are so close to the president, like his chief of staff, there's a worry that this could set a precedent, so that if, let's say, Republicans are in charge of the House and they decide that they want to subpoena Ron Klain, the current White House chief of staff, there's a feeling there on the part of some Democrats that you want to be able to claim executive privilege. That's what a lot of these White House officials are going to try to do, former White House officials from the Trump administration. But there are some Democrats cautioning that if you start interviewing and forcing executives to testify who were working for a White House, that could backfire on Democrats coming in the days forward, in the years forward.